Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we have another hand from the $10,000 buy-in World Series of Poker main event that I played last year. World Series of Poker is underway, and I'm looking forward to playing a lot of hands. Here we get aces. I like to raise the cutoff to 250, 2.5 big blinds, very, very standard. A tight aggressive guy makes it 750 from the button. And whenever this happens, I'm usually looking to 4-bet in the spot. I'm not really trying to slow play versus exactly a 3-bet, especially late position 3-bet, because this is a spot where players typically get very out of line. And I imagine I've been playing a somewhat loose aggressive strategy so far anyway, so my 4-bets are going to carry way less weight than most people's 4-bets. To my surprise, though, a tight passive player in the big blind elects to 4-bet to 2,150. When a tight passive player 4-bets, it is almost always a sign of a very strong hand. So what is a very strong hand in this tournament? It's probably something like pocket jacks or better and ace king. So I have to ask myself, how are we going to get the most value from those hands? Should we 4-bet to get a call immediately and then have our opponent check fold a lot of flops when they miss? Or should we call, let our opponent see a flop, and then hopefully play well after the flop? There are some worlds where it comes like king, queen, jack, where I can end up getting away from my hand, but we're certainly not trying to fold the aces, especially in a 4-bet pot. So I think probably the best line here is to go ahead and 4-bet, because I think a lot of amateur players will call the 4-bet and then never fold no repair on the flop to 1-bet. I can then check turn and then likely extract value on the river. So I think this is a spot where we're going to win half of our opponent's stack a ton of the time. So I like 4-betting, and you can 4-bet kind of large. I think you can make it something like 5,500, maybe 5,200, something like that, because your opponent's not going to fold if he has something like queens, for example. He's just going to call and see what happens, especially a tight passive player. So I do go 5,500, and tight passive guy calls as expected. Then they give us ace, jack, 5. Great flop. My opponent checks, and I elect to check behind. I think on the flop, when you flop top set, your opponent's only going to continue here if he has ace king, which you're going to win a lot of money from anyway, or pocket jacks, which you're also going to win a lot of money from. If he has kings or queens or tens or something like that, a hand that doesn't connect with this board, he's going to check fold every single time. So by checking behind, we give our opponent a huge opportunity to make a mistake on the turn. Notice we are not concerned with the flush draws or anything like that on the flop. The odds my opponent has exactly king, queen of clubs or something like that is very, very rare. Also, I have the ace of clubs, so we're not worried about the nut flush draw. Some people do look at this spot and think, man, I really don't want a 10 to come off, and I think a 10 would be the worst card. But even then, the odds of our opponent 4-betting king, queen and calling a 5-bet with king, queen are incredibly low. So we have the stone nuts on the flop, and we're not susceptible to draws at all. Very similar to a hand I played last, maybe 2 episodes ago, or 2 videos ago in this series for Poker News, where we had ace-9 on ace-9 2. We're just not concerned with draws at all. We want to do everything we can to let our opponent mess up. So anyway, he bets 5,600 on the turn. And at this point, I have to ask, if I raise, will he pay me off with anything that he will not also pay me off with on the river if I call the turn and then he bets the river and or he checks and I jam the river? Notice that when he bets 5,600, the pot's going to balloon up to 20,000, and we're only going to have 17,000 left in our stack. So I think calling here is the right play. Again, we're not worried about draws. A 3 and a 2 are, again, complete bricks. So this seems like a pretty great spot to call and hope the board runs out. Well, whatever gives our opponent the second nuts is what we really are hoping for. River's an 8. It's a complete blank. And our opponent now checks. We have 17,000 in our stack. The pot's 23,000. And if this was just like a standard online game, I think I would shove. But against this particular type passive opponent in the World Series of Poker main event, I think the best play is to probably bet small. And I mean very small, like 4,600. If we go all in, our opponent's never going to call with kings or queens. And if he had pocket jacks, he would have shoved anyway. If he has ace queen, he may not even call an all in. So by betting small, we're trying to get called by kings and queens and maybe a random ace like ace queen or ace 10. It may seem very face up that we're betting small in this scenario, but the odds of me getting called for any bet more than about 4,600. If our opponent has worse than an ace, is incredibly low. And the odds of him having worse than an ace here are very, very high in my estimation. So when he checks, I think I need to bet about 4,800. Instead, I bet 11,000, leaving myself 6,900 behind. And I think this is probably the worst of the bets, unless my opponent thinks I'm very bluffy. If my opponent thinks I'm very bluffy, then this bet becomes pretty sweet because he may decide to call with all sorts of hands like kings. So I don't remember my exact image at this time, but I imagine in order for me to bet this size, I had to have thought that my opponent would be capable of making a hero call. But again, in the main event, people don't make hero calls. People aren't trying to do anything too ridiculous. They're just trying to play their cards. And if you make a guy, if you put a guy in a spot where he has to make a big hero call, he's probably just not going to make it. So I think this is a spot where I probably messed up on the river. I probably should have bet a little bit smaller, well, a lot smaller, and just taken the somewhat free equity when he shows me pocket queens, because I do think he would call a small bet with pocket queens on this river. He does fold, and we win the pot. Not what we want. I want to make it clear. Whenever you win the pot with what is the best hand on the river, it's not very often a good result. It's a bad result. We missed out on value, and you have to be harsh on yourself. This is how you get good at poker. You work hard, you study, you find spots where you could do better. And hopefully next time we run into this spot, hopefully I make lots of top sets in the main event, you get full value. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, let the people at Poker News know. And be sure to check back next week for another poker hand. Thanks for watching.